Patton, who's the Chief Climate Product Officer for Zurich Financial Services. She'll continue the climate risk discussion, but from an insurance perspective, and explain why investment in sustainable infrastructure protects the insurability of the built environment. If you can't insure the city, then your economic growth is really in jeopardy. She's also going to be talking about some new risk models that I think you'll find particularly interesting and useful as we move into the future. Finally, Jeb Brugman, who's the managing partner of the Next Practice, but also the founding Secretary General of ICLEI, and a leading author, Welcome to the Urban Revolution, How Cities Are Changing in the World, one of his really industry-leading books. Jeb is going to address ways to use conventional tools, traditional municipal tools, to attract conventional and private investment flows to pay for the climate and risk reduction alternatives that are necessary to really ensure the economic future of our cities. This is a really insightful presentation. Jeb is really a visionary in this area. Well, let's get started.
Karen?
So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and on the panel with such esteemed colleagues. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about Chicago. We want to ensure that our city is a great place to live, to work, and to play, and want it to be a great place both in the days and the decades to come. So for us, every decision can be a sustainable decision, part of how we think about the broad questions facing our cities. So in the next slide, living in Chicago, like living in a city, is one of the critical elements broadly on the question of sustainability. Now, what this map shows you is the contrast between emissions per acre on the left and emissions per capita on the right. So a fundamental shift in terms of where those emissions come from. The great transportation, the dense housing, really limits the greenhouse gas emissions per capita in the city of Chicago and in other cities around the world. So while climate change is a global issue, many of the greenhouse gases are generated in urban areas, and in the U.S., the majority of folks live in cities. So the opportunity to think about what we do in cities is far-reaching, both for us here in Chicago than much more broadly. So when we think about living in the cities, the next slide shows us some of the climate impacts that will happen when we look specifically at Chicago. And so we look at a variety of impacts that are likely to come, first of which is temperature. And so we will see winters that are several degrees Celsius warmer, summers that are even more than that, and many more intense and frequent heat events. In particular, I have to call it for us is there will be a significant increase, most likely in days over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and those are quite dangerous to human health. We'll see changes in precipitation, and it's actually exacerbating it when you lead it least. So spring and winter for us will likely be wetter. Summer will likely be drier, and more extreme storm events will be frequent. Fundamentally for us, the seasons are migrating most likely. Winter will be moving more towards a milder Midwest climate, while summers could be moving more in the Gulf Coast general direction. So the picture you have here is actually what that means for our plants. And this shows the plant hardiness zone. And the Midwest plant hardiness zones has shifted, and so it's already shifted here in Chicago. And then one other critical factor in this area on climate is just the Great Lakes. And so if emissions are high, the models predict that Lake Michigan's levels will actually be decreasing. And it also will have impacts on significant Great Lakes storms. So a lot to think about in terms of a city and what we need to prepare for. So the next slide really highlights that cities adapt. And so in thinking about that, an individual might be able to choose to move, but Chicago's staying. It's a fantastic city in which to live, and we want to make sure it stays that way.